What if I told you that the meat you've been feeding your family isn't nearly as natural, fresh, or premium as the labels make it look? That behind those bright lights and bargain prices lies a system built on loopholes, chemical tricks, and processes banned in other countries? Today, we're peeling back the curtain on the one place you'd least expect it, Costco's meat department. And once you hear what's really happening before that meat ever hits the shelf, you may never look at your shopping cart the same way again. If there's one thing Costco has perfected, it's the art of drawing you across the entire warehouse with a single smell. Long before you reach the back corner, that warm, savory aroma hits you. The one that feels like a hug, a memory, and a dinner solution all at once. And sitting there under those glowing heat lamps are the stars of the show, the legendary $4.99 rotisserie chickens. They're iconic, they're irresistible, and they are absolutely not what they appear to be. Because the secret behind that famous bird doesn't start in the kitchen. It starts in a processing room long before the chicken ever sees an oven. That's where Costco gives every single bird a little boost. And by boost, I mean they inject the chickens with a phosphate solution that makes them heavier, juicier, and far more profitable. Here's the part most people don't realize, that juiciness you think you're tasting isn't just natural chicken moisture. It's up to 15% added liquid. That's nearly half a pound of brine and water in a typical Costco rotisserie chicken. You think you're paying for poultry, but a noticeable chunk of what hits your plate never clucked a day in its life. And this is exactly how Costco keeps that $4.99 price frozen in time, while every other grocery item gets more expensive. When you quietly add water weight, suddenly the numbers make sense. It's not a miracle of business, it's accounting flavored with phosphate. Now, if you've ever pulled apart a Costco chicken and noticed the texture feels, well, a little slippery, almost rubbery in spots, that's the chemistry doing its thing. The phosphate doesn't just increase weight, it transforms the texture and boosts the saltiness far beyond what you'd get from a normal roast. It's the kind of chicken that tastes good, but also tastes like something was done to it. And the best part for Costco? They don't have to put any kind of bold warning label on it. The FDA gives this process a thumbs up, so the only disclosure you get is a tiny line in microscopic print that says, enhanced with up to 15% solution. Try spotting that while someone is ramming a flatbed cart past your ankles. Meanwhile, Costco is moving over 100 million rotisserie chickens a year, so many that the company built its own chicken production facility just to keep the operation running smoothly. No other retailer in America even comes close to this scale. And that's why this matters. This isn't one or two chickens. This is a national habit, a tradition, a weekly ritual for millions of families, built on a bird that's been engineered to hit a price point, not a standard. Costco gets the loyalty. They get the foot traffic. They get the reputation for unbelievable value. And you get a chicken that's, well, part dinner, part brine, and part business strategy. If Costco's chicken story didn't sit right with you, the steak situation might take things to a whole new level. Because when most people walk past Costco's meat cases, they see what looks like a carnivore's paradise. Thick ribeyes, glossy sirloins, beautifully marbled cuts lined up like trophies. The kind of meat that practically whispers, "Grill me." But behind that pristine display is a process shoppers almost never hear about. And once you do, you'll never look at those steaks the same way again. It starts with something the industry calls mechanical tenderizing. Now, on paper, that sounds helpful, like a little spa treatment for your steak. But the reality is a lot less glamorous. Mechanical tenderizing means your steak is fed through a machine that stabs it repeatedly with dozens of tiny blades or needles, puncturing hole after hole through the muscle. Why do this? Simple. It makes tougher, cheaper cuts feel more expensive. It speeds up tenderizing that normally happens over days or weeks. It makes the meat softer, easier to chew, and more appealing to the average shopper. But here's the problem. Those needles don't discriminate. They pierce the exterior of the meat, and with each poke, they have the potential to drag surface bacteria deep into the center of the cut. Bacteria that normally die the moment a steak hits a hot skillet now get tucked safely inside the portion that stays pink, warm, and undercooked. That's not hypothetical risk. That's biology. So you might think you're cooking a perfect medium-rare steak while unknowingly leaving harmful microbes alive and well in the middle. And unless you cook the meat to a higher temperature than most steak lovers would ever tolerate, that bacteria could stay right where those needles left it. Now here's the part that frustrates food safety experts. Most shoppers have no idea when they're buying a mechanically tenderized steak. There's no giant warning label, no tenderized for your convenience sticker. Usually, the only sign is a small line of text buried in the fine print. small enough to miss even if you are the type of person who reads labels. And visually? Forget it. Those needle marks are practically invisible. You could spend a lifetime cooking steaks and never spot the difference. But the consequences are real. The industry has already faced at least one major recall involving over 100,000 pounds of mechanically tenderized beef, an enormous amount, because of contamination concerns linked to this exact process. A whole mountain of meat pulled off shelves after it was already shipped, stocked, and in some cases cooked and eaten. Yet despite the risks, the process remains common. Why? Because it's profitable. Because it makes cheaper cuts sell faster. Because most consumers simply don't know enough to question it. And that's the uneasy truth. You walk into Costco expecting premium meat at a fair price, and in many cases, you're getting a cut that's been poked full of holes like a pincushion, altered without your knowledge, changed without your consent. You do everything right. You choose a good cut, you cook it properly, you serve it with pride, but behind the scenes, the meat was modified long before it ever reached your cart. And of course, this isn't the only modification happening at Costco's meat counters. Because once you start pulling at this thread, you realize the needle treatment is just the beginning of a much bigger story. If the needle-poked steaks didn't already make you question things, the next practice might actually make you put the package back on the shelf. Because while shoppers are busy picking the best-looking cut, nicest color, cleanest marbling, perfect shape, Costco is quietly using another trick to make those cuts look bigger, juicier, and more profitable than they actually are. And it all comes down to one simple concept. Weight equals money. When you buy beef or pork by the pound, every ounce counts. So what if a store could make that meat just a little heavier, without adding any actual meat? That's where Costco's next behind-the-scenes method comes in, because a surprising number of those pork loins, roasts, and even some beef cuts have been pumped full of a salty brine solution before they ever hit the display case. Not marinated at home, not seasoned in the kitchen, injected behind the scenes to make the cut weigh more. And we're not talking a gentle sprinkle of salt. These injections can boost the weight of the meat by 10 to 15%. That means if you're buying a $40 piece of beef, as much as $8 of that total could be salt water. You think you're buying premium protein, but what you're actually getting is a meat-flavored water balloon dressed up as a steak. This is the part that catches people off guard. Many shoppers assume injected meat is a budget store tactic, something corner markets do to improve cheap cuts. But Costco, one of the most trusted names in bulk groceries, does it too. And very few people realize it's happening. Because unless you're specifically hunting for the tiny phrase, "solution added," buried in the fine print, nothing on the packaging tells you that your beautiful roast is carrying more brine than a pickle barrel. And the effects don't stop at your wallet. All that added sodium doesn't just alter flavor, it changes the entire eating experience. The meat becomes unnaturally juicy in some spots, strangely mushy in others, with a saltiness that hits you harder than you expect. Instead of that rich, natural beef or pork flavor, you get something that tastes engineered. For people watching their sodium intake, especially older adults, this isn't just annoying, it's genuinely concerning. A normal portion of meat can suddenly turn into a sodium bomb, and you'd never know unless you dug through fine print with a magnifying glass. Yet despite all of this, the practice remains perfectly legal. Not just legal, common. And because the brine solution keeps the meat looking plump and fresh, shoppers never suspect a thing. Costco gets heavier products that command higher prices. The meat department hits its profit targets, and customers walk out the door thinking they just scored a great deal, without realizing they paid steakhouse prices for glorified saltwater. But here's the wildest part. The brine injections aren't even the most shocking thing being added to Costco's meat. There's another treatment, one designed specifically to make the meat look fresh long after it should. And that illusion is where things get even more unsettling. By now, you've seen how Costco adds liquid to make meat heavier and more profitable. But what happens when that meat starts aging? When the color begins to fade? When it looks less like a premium cut and more like something that's been sitting around a little too long? Well, this is where Costco turns to its most convincing trick yet. One that doesn't change the weight of the meat, but completely transforms how fresh it appears. Because that bright cherry red glow you see in Costco's meat department? Yeah. A lot of that is the result of chemical additives designed to keep meat looking vibrant long after its natural color has faded. We're talking about compounds like sodium lactate and citric acid, ingredients that sound harmless, almost healthy, until you learn what they actually do. These chemicals slow discoloration, extend shelf life, and keep the meat looking like it just came off the butcher block, even when it's been sitting around significantly longer than you'd ever guess. It's basically makeup for meat, and the illusion works unbelievably well. Shoppers walk in, see that bright red color, and instantly associate it with freshness. It's an instinct. Fresh meat is red, old meat turns brown. But these additives break that rule entirely. The beef could be several days older than it looks, yet still appear vibrant and farm fresh under those bright Costco lights. And the impact doesn't stop with looks, these additives change texture too. The meat becomes firmer, almost unnaturally so, with a bounce that doesn't quite match what real, untreated beef should feel like. And the flavor? Let's just say it leans more toward chemistry experiment than family barbecue. Here's what makes this especially concerning. Most customers have no idea these additives are being used. The labels don't shout it, the packaging doesn't warn you. The big bold letters all say fresh, while the truth is tucked into the smallest possible font, hidden in plain sight between terms like natural flavoring or preservatives. And this matters even more for people keeping an eye on their health. Extra sodium from these treatments can hit blood pressure hard. Sensitive stomach? Good luck. These additives aren't exactly gentle on digestion, especially for older adults or anyone with dietary restrictions. But again, this whole process is legal, perfectly allowed, entirely within the rules. Which leaves shoppers stuck in a strange place, believing they're buying fresh, high-quality meat, when in reality they're buying a product that's been chemically dressed up to look impressive. And what's even more unsettling is that these freshness tricks are just a surface-level illusion. Because beneath that artificially bright exterior lies another issue, one you can't see at all. A problem that hides not in the color, but deep inside the meat itself. A problem that starts with how fast America's chickens are being raised, and how that rush is creating a texture issue even seasoned cooks can't fix. If you've ever cooked a chicken breast from Costco and thought, why does this chew like a rubber sandal? You're not alone. And no, it's not your seasoning or your cooking skills. What you're running into is a growing industry-wide issue called woody breast syndrome. This isn't spoilage or bad handling, it's a muscle disorder caused by how fast modern chickens are raised, pushed to grow unnaturally large in a fraction of the time nature intended. Their muscle fibers simply can't keep up, and the result is meat that turns dense, tough, and almost cartilage-like. The frustrating part? You can't spot it in the store. Under those bright Costco lights, the breasts look perfectly normal, plump, pink, and ready for dinner. But once you slice it at home, the truth shows itself. The knife doesn't glide, it drags. The meat feels stiff, squeaky, unnaturally firm. It's the kind of texture that makes even experienced cooks think they did something wrong. And this isn't rare. Studies suggest up to 10% of chicken breasts in some batches are affected. So when you buy a large family pack, the odds of getting a few woody pieces are surprisingly high. Costco can't label it. They can't sort it out. They can't warn you, because there's no visual sign until you're already cooking it. And while it isn't dangerous, it exposes a bigger issue. The rush to produce cheap chicken at massive scale comes with real unavoidable trade-offs. If the meat looks perfect on the shelf but cooks like a stress ball, something behind the scenes is off. And unfortunately, tough texture isn't the only hidden problem in Costco's poultry supply. Because while woody breasts might ruin your dinner, the next issue has led to full-blown recalls. Woody chicken is annoying, sure, but Costco's biggest meat issue isn't texture, it's safety. Because behind the shiny packaging and bright lighting, Costco has faced a string of recalls that should make any shopper pause. In 2021, nearly 150,000 pounds of frozen chicken patties were recalled because they contained actual plastic pieces, large enough for people to feel them when they bit down. Families had already served them before the warning even came out. But that was just the beginning. A couple of years earlier, Costco had to pull more than 400,000 pounds of ground beef due to E. coli contamination, a staggering amount of meat that had already reached kitchens across multiple states. Some customers had eaten it long before the recall notice appeared. Even their famous rotisserie chickens weren't immune. Certain batches were linked to listeria concerns, a bacteria especially dangerous for pregnant women, the elderly, and anyone with a weakened immune system. And here's the unsettling part. These recalls often go public after the meat is sold. Costco posts small white notices near the store entrance, but by then thousands of customers have already stocked their freezers with the affected products, completely unaware anything is wrong. This isn't because Costco is careless, it's because their suppliers operate at massive scale. When meat is processed by the ton, one contaminated batch doesn't stay local. It spreads everywhere fast. All of this points to a bigger issue, a meat system designed for speed and volume, where safety warnings often arrive too late. And unfortunately, what Costco does next behind the scenes makes the story even more complicated. By now you've heard about injections, additives, recalls, and even needle-poked steaks. But there's one more behind-the-scenes practice that Costco shoppers almost never think about, yet it affects one of the most popular items in their entire meat department: ground beef. When most people grab a package of ground beef, they imagine it comes from a single cut of meat. Maybe a chuck roast trimmed down and fed into a grinder? Something simple. Something straightforward. But that's not how large-scale meat production works, especially not at Costco's volume. Instead, ground beef is often made from trimmings from multiple different animals, blended together into one uniform batch. Leftover pieces from one cow, trimmings from another, older cuts mixed with newer cuts, all combined until the entire mixture looks perfectly consistent. It's like making a smoothie out of whatever fruit is left in the fridge. Once it's blended, you'd never know what went into it. And here's why that matters. If even one of those contributing pieces contains harmful bacteria, it doesn't just stay in one corner of the package. It spreads throughout the entire batch. What might have contaminated 1 pound suddenly contaminates hundreds, sometimes thousands of pounds of meat. That's why ground beef recalls always seem so massive. One bad input becomes everyone's problem. But consumers never see that complexity. The package just says ground beef, maybe with a fat percentage listed. There's no hint that the meat inside could come from 10 different cows, harvested at different times, from different locations, at different stages of freshness. The mixing also affects quality. Different cuts have different textures, fat contents, and flavors. Combine them all and you get a product that cooks unevenly. Parts that brown quickly next to parts that stubbornly stay pink, spots that taste richer alongside sections that taste flat. It's a culinary grab bag wrapped in tidy plastic. For older generations who grew up buying meat from local butchers, this process would be unthinkable. A hamburger used to come from one animal. Now it's more like a collaborative project. And the strangest part? This is all hidden in plain sight. Costco isn't doing anything illegal. They're not even doing anything unusual. This blending process is standard across the modern meat industry. But most shoppers have absolutely no idea what ground beef actually means anymore, or how many different sources could be inside a single package. And once you understand that, the final layer of Costco's meat strategy becomes clear: the presentation. Because after all the injections, mixing, tenderizing, and preserving, the last thing Costco has to do is make everything look picture perfect on the shelf. And that, right there, sets up the final reveal. After everything we've uncovered, the injections, additives, recalls, and blending, you'd expect Costco's meat department to look like a crime scene. But instead, it looks flawless. Bright reds, perfect marbling, cuts lined up like they're auditioning for a catalog. And that's the point. Costco relies heavily on presentation to keep customers confident. The lighting is engineered to make meat look fresher. Packaging is designed to hide imperfections. Uniform shapes come from trimming and processing that make every cut appear consistent, even when what's inside is anything but. Because when the meat looks perfect, most shoppers won't question what happened before it hit the shelf. They won't think about the phosphate injections, the needle tenderizing, the brine solutions, or the fact that their ground beef might come from half a dozen different animals. Nothing Costco is doing is illegal, but the system is built on one simple truth: if the illusion holds, the questions never start. So the next time you walk through Costco's meat aisle, remember, what you're seeing is the final act of a very carefully crafted performance. Behind the bright lights and shiny packaging is a process built for speed, consistency, and profit. Not transparency. You don't have to stop shopping at Costco, but you should know what you're really buying, and now you do.